This is it, people. This is what you've been waiting for. This is Everyday Celebrity Podcast. The podcast for everyday people with everyday problems, trying to find everyday solutions to accomplish everyday goals. Let's start the show. Welcome to another episode of Everyday Celebrity Podcast, number one podcast in Oakland, number one podcast in the Bay Area. And today we have a special guest, very, very special guest. There's a lot of things going on in the country. Not in our, though there is a lot of things going on in the country, but there's a specific thing going on in the world that everyone is talking about. Israel and Palestine, the war. And I wanted to sit with a professional on this subject because I don't know a lot of things about it. And when I go to social media, I hear and see a lot of young people protesting. And then when you ask these people, what are you really protesting about? And they don't really know what they're talking about, right? Because they don't know the history of the land, the people. And I feel like they are just saying things because it's a trendy topic. So I wanted to get a professional and sit down with a person who really knows and studies this. So welcome, Scott Prosterman, to the podcast. How are you this evening?
Oh, I could be a lot happier, but I know how lucky I am. Thank you very much. And yes, we are in a very troubling situation in this world. Much of it centers around what's going on in Israel and Palestine right now, and by extension, how it's impacting American electoral politics, the upcoming 2024 election, and Joe Biden's chances of being reelected. But first, a bit about my background.
Explain. So I said you were a professional, but people want to know why you're a professional.
Okay.
Why do you call yourself a professional? So let's start back with your background.
Okay. First of all, I thank you for dignifying me as a professional, although some might diminish me to semi-professional. I have to accept that. I'm a professional writer and editor here in Oakland. And I happen to grow up in Memphis in the height of the Civil Rights era. And ironically, chillingly, my bar mitzvah in Memphis was 5 weeks after Martin Luther King was killed there. So that was a transformative time in my life. And I guess I'm a radical Jew from Memphis, and there aren't too many of me.
Does Memphis have a big Jewish population?
It does. It's about 13 or 14,000. And what's interesting, and this is related to what we're talking about too, is that Memphis is really two different cities. The city itself is majority black. The congressional representative is Steve Cohen, a close friend of mine from way back. He's the only Jewish congressman in the House who represents a majority black district. And I'm proud to say, along with outgoing Rep. Barbara Lee here in Oakland, she is, okay, thank you. Along with Barbara Lee and the wonderful women on the squad, Steve Cohen is one of the most progressive members of the House and has been in the forefront of holding our former president, T-Rump, that's what I call our former president, lowercase t, capital R-U-M-P, T-Rump. Cohen's been prominent in trying to hold him accountable and protect an important agenda for all of us, for civil rights, human rights, everything else. I did a master's at the University of Michigan in Middle Eastern Studies, which is what gives me some standing to discuss this. I have been researching and reading about and teaching on this subject since I was in grad school, maybe since I was an undergrad, giving talks. And you hit the nail on the head in the introduction that there's a lot of misinformation going around. And that's what's destructive. And that's what I hope we can begin to counter here with this discussion. And thank you for the opportunity to do so. One of the things that motivated me to devote my academic career to Israel and Palestine was that when I was a sophomore in college and took my first academic course on Arab-Israeli dispute, I was shocked to find that most of what I learned in Temple Sunday School was what I now call Temple Sunday School myth, that does not say anything about the Nabka or the negative effect of the founding of Israel on Palestine and Palestinians and their own exodus. Another tragic and sad irony is this. Israel was created to give Jews a haven and refuge, not only from the Holocaust, but the more than 1,000 years of pogroms in Europe leading up to the Holocaust. That's why it was necessary in many people's minds to have a Jewish state that was run by Jews and favors Jews. Sadly, Zionism has morphed into something very, very ugly. Another thing people don't understand is that Zionism did not begin with any notions of Jewish nationalism or colonialism or anything like that, or even biblical prophecy. Zionism began as a secular agrarian movement by progressive Jews in different parts of Europe who just wanted to live in peace, farm their own land, run their own trades, and take care of business and get along in life. What's really been tragic...
What is define Zionism? What does that mean?
That's a good question, because in my mind, the definition of Zionism has evolved. And it's a slippery concept because there are so many different varieties and strains of Zionism. Social Zionism, agrarian Zionism, and leading up to Israel's founding, there were huge disputes and faction wars, not shooting wars, but faction wars among the different strains, communist, socialist, and others who each created their own brand of Zionism. What is Zionism? It is... Originally, Zionism meant the support for the creation of a Jewish state as a haven and refuge. Over the years, the concept of Zionism has evolved to different things to different people. And what's been really destructive under Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who we will call Bibi for short, that's his nickname, Bibi, under his leadership, Israeli governments have taken a sharp tack to the far right of any ideological spectrum or political dynamic. And what's even more disturbing is that there is a direct, deeply unholy alliance with Bibi in Israel and T-Rump in the United States. I published several articles on the website Informed Comment, and I would encourage everyone to check out my work on informedcomment.com. It's published at the University of Michigan by Professor Juan Cole, who is an amazing man. He is the director of the department, publishes this website, and is globally famous for his books and speaking and managing the great Middle Eastern Studies program at the University of Michigan. So, in some of these articles, I've discussed the direct alliance between T-Rump and Bibi, noting how they have literally campaigned for one another, T-Rump in Israel and Bibi in the United States. One of the most offensive things that Netanyahu did was in 2015, when Barack Obama was still president. Netanyahu refused an invitation to the White House. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Obama refused to invite Netanyahu to the White House in 2015 because he was furious with him, pardon me, for breaking so many agreements and for trying to show up President Obama himself. And former Speaker John Boehner, who now knows better, made the colossally inflammatory move of inviting Netanyahu to speak before a joint session of Congress, even though Obama did not want that. And every word of his speech was intended to show up Obama. What's equally disturbing is how so many Republican Jews in America, and don't get me wrong, there are many, many more progressive, left-leaning Jews in America, who are deeply troubled and deeply pained by what's going on in Israel and Gaza these days. But sadly, the Republican Jews have a lot more money and a much more visible voice in Congress because of some of the horrible people like Elena Stefaniak, who's trying to be Tehran's vice presidential candidate, and people like that. So, circling back, Zionism began as a secular agrarian movement. Under Netanyahu, it has morphed into a very ugly ideology of oppression, imperialism, and actually prosecuting a campaign of genocide in Gaza, which is deeply inimical, deeply antithetical to everything that Judaism stands for. I'll encourage your listeners and our readers to do a search on Informed Comment and put in my name, Prosterman, with Naomi Klein. Naomi Klein is a brilliant Jewish scholar who argues very much of the same point of view that I do. And in conjunction with Passover, which we celebrated last month, Professor Klein issued a beautiful statement, a beautiful sermon about how Netanyahu is now the Pharaoh. We were celebrating our salvation and redemption from Egypt at a time when the Israeli government is prosecuting a horrible genocidal war against the native Palestinian people. That leads us to another tragic irony that I was about to mention moments ago. Jews were known as the Indians of Europe for hundreds of years.
Wait. let me stop you.
Yeah.
Because I want this to be like basically like a history lesson, right? For a lot of people who don't know about the history of these this land and these people.
Okay.
So we're gonna start talking about before. I don't want to get into Netanyahu and what's currently going on. I want to, because this didn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? It was years and years and years of conflict. So I want to start at the beginning of, not the beginning of time, but at the beginning. Now, you are Jewish, correct?
I am.
And now, the question I always ask every Jewish person that I sit down and talk to is, Jewish a nationality of people, or is Jews a religion?
That's a great question. Judaism is a religion.
Mm-hmm.
Judaism is a religion composed of many ethnicities,
mm-hmm.
many nationalities.
Because you could be black and Jewish, right?
Absolutely.
But in order to be Jewish, is it correct? Is it true that your mother has to be Jewish?
That's another very good question. Technically, yes, short answer. However, I'm happy to accept anyone into the tribe who makes a self-proclamation, or if their father was Jewish but their mother wasn't, or they have a devotion or affinity to what we believe. Whereas the question you asked has a lot to do with who gets to make those decisions. And unfortunately, the folks on the far, far right and the most observant are the ones who say, your mother has to be Jewish. Now, there's some very good reasons for that. Judaism comes from a matriarchal lineage. The reason that you technically have to have a Jewish mother to be considered Jewish or go through an Orthodox conversion is that whereas there may always be doubt as to who the father of a child is, there can be no doubt as to who the mother of a child is.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So that's why the deeply observant Orthodox Jews do not accept as Jews people who are not born to a Jewish mother or have an Orthodox conversion.
Now, when you say Orthodox Jews, what does that mean?
Orthodox Jews are the most observant. That's the Jewish people who we call Shamir Shabbat, guardians of the Sabbath, guardians of the Shabbos. They're the people who claim to, and mostly do, observe all 613 tenets of the Torah, Talmud, Midrash, and our other sacred scrolls. They're the people who keep the Sabbath, who have special rules in their home about not driving on the Sabbath, not turning lights on and off, things like that.
So they're like the extreme.
Yes, the
Jews.
most observant. Extreme,
Okay.
yes. It's fair to call it extreme.
Mm.
And most families like that come from a tradition of families from way back.
Mm.
My bar mitzvah occurred in the Reformed Temple in Memphis under the Rabbi James A. Wax, who literally completed King's work in Memphis after King was killed there, and led the Memphis Ministers Association in challenging Mayor Henry Loeb at the time to come to the table and do the right thing. One thing I want to get back to, just briefly. In 1981, I had the opportunity to interview the great actor Russell Means, the great Indian-American actor Russell Means. And I asked him in front of 1,000 people at Rackham Auditorium in Ann Arbor, how do you compare the plight of the Palestinians to the plight of the American Indians? His answer was simple. He said, we are the Palestinians of America. They are the Indians of the Middle East. That's chilling because at one time, Jews were the Indians of Europe. But we gave up that high ground with the way things are unfolding in Gaza and the West Bank of Palestine right now.
Mm.
So you posed a good question.
So now that we got the definition of Jews, right? So we have this group of people. Originally, where was this group of people located? Because it wasn't in Palestine, correct?
Where were the Jewish people, or where were the...
I mean, I know there were Jewish people around everywhere, right? But where was the majority of them? Was it Germany?
Most of the original Jewish immigrants to Israel, before it was Israel, came from Europe. And then 10 years after Israel's founding in 1958, many of the Arab nations, most notably Iraq, started treating their Jews harshly and expelling them. So in 1958, there was a sudden influx of Jews from Arab and North African countries that changed the demographic and the context of the nation. And the Jews from Europe are considered Ashkenazi Jews from one tradition. The Jews from North Africa and the Middle East are known as Sephardic Jews, which come from a different tradition. Their different synagogues have different liturgies, different melodies to the prayers and so forth, and the chants. And at times they didn't always get along in the founding of Israel in the early days.
Why do you think Jews were being treated so badly in all these countries?
That's a good question and a tough question.
Because when I look at it, I mean, I don't see, like, I always ask myself, well, like, why does everyone hate Jews? What is the reason? And some people tell me because everyone blames Jews for murdering God or Jesus or whatever.
Okay.
If you're like into religion, I'm not, but they blame the Jews for killing Jesus.
Right.
And that's why they're hated so much.
All right. That was the original prompt for anti-Semitism going back to the time of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that was what Christian and Catholic people were taught in their churches and Sunday schools until 1963, when Pope John the 23rd issued the second Vatican II, it's called, the Second Conference on Vatican Ecumenical whatever. And Pope John the 23rd decreed that the Jews were not responsible for the death of Jesus, and that they should stop treating us harshly. And from that point forward, it became a little bit easier for us. I happened to grow up as one of 3 Jewish families in an otherwise all Catholic neighborhood. So there was, even as a child, I noticed a dramatic difference in the way we were treated and perceived at the time. At the same time, there's always been other forces of anti-Semitism, economic. The Crusades were many Jews were killed in the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition in the late 15th century. And the history of Europe shows, they call it 1,000 years, but it's really more than 1,000 years of persecution, of organized pogroms to do to Jews what Netanyahu's government is doing to the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank now. That's why it's so shocking and important to remember this. If you get no other takeaway from this talk, remember this. Zionism is not Judaism. Zionism is a political movement that evolved out of Judaism and has evolved diametrically opposed to Jewish ideals. Hamas is not Islam. Islam is a beautiful religion. I've given considerable study to Islam, and Christianity too, for that fact. And Islam does not preach hate against Jews. On the contrary, Islam honors 18 Jewish prophets, along with Jesus and Muhammad, as their own prophets. Not all of them, but 18 Jewish prophets are also considered prophets of Islam. And since that time, there have been political leaders and some rogue scholars, as I call them, who try to twist it around to argue that Muslims and Jews never got along. That's not true. There were beautiful periods in history where Jews and Muslims cooperated beautifully in social, community, agricultural, academic, primarily in North Africa in the 12th through early 15th centuries, the time of the famous Jewish scholar, rabbi, physician Maimonides, who had many collaborations with the Islamic scholars Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, among others. So there have been periods of history when Jews and Muslims protected each other, namely during the Crusades. Muslims protected Jews from the marauding Christians during their Crusades. So there's a lot of beautiful history there that's been lost in recent years because of what we now recognize as the perversion of Zionism. Zionism is not Judaism. It is an aspect, an adjunct of Judaism that many Jews have now rejected because of the horrible ways that it has evolved. Thank you for asking that question.
All right. So Scott, I want you to focus on the exact question that I'm asking you. We're going to stick. We're going to get to all that, but I want this to be like a timeline of.
All right, I'll let you drive.
Of how we got to this point which is war, right? Okay, so we find out who Jews are, basically, right? We know who Jews are. So they were hated, and they have been ran out of. Well, the next question is, why did Jews feel that they didn't have a country? So you know how, like, Mexicans, they're in Mexico.
Right.
That's their land. Indians were in the United States. It's their land. Black people were in Africa. It's their land. You have Japanese in Japan, Chinese in China. Jews, why do Jews feel that they needed their own land and country? And why didn't they have their own land and country?
Okay. Why didn't they have their own land and country? Because so many governments in Europe from the time of the Crusades onward simply hated Jews for being Jews. I can't tell you why that is. Some of it was, well, obviously it's some element of resentment. How and why these resentments developed hundreds and up to 1,000 years ago, that's complex. I can't really put a finger on that.
Because to me, it doesn't make sense, because it's like we said before, you said it's like a religion, right?
Judaism is a religion across many ethnicities.
Yeah.
And
because it's like saying Christians, like if I'm a Christian, I think Christians should have their own, like Alameda. This should be Christian land. That doesn't make sense.
All right. Now, that's a good point. And many Jewish people see that as a provocation. I don't. And the question is being posed quite a bit these days. Why should Jews be entitled to their own country?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's a tough one. The best answer I can give you is because we had no place to go. We had no place to be where we could live in peace without being harassed and brutalized. An interesting linguistic irony is this. I'm circling back to your question here. In the Yiddish language, the question, how are you, is considered a provocation. Why is that? Because for thousands of years, that question was posed under obviously horrible, horrible circumstances. Like, how you doing, Mordechai? What do you mean, how am I doing? The Cossacks came and broke up my home last night. They beat me up. They brought the furniture. They beat up my wife. How should I be? So that's where you get the commonly rude Jewish retort of how should I be? Because things were obviously not going well. And it's a provocation to ask, how are you doing when someone is obviously in pain? That's a tough thing for when you're visiting the hospital too.
Mm.
So, but circling back to the motivations for anti-Semitism, there are many. Volumes have been written about that. We would have a separate podcast or three about that question alone.
Mm.
There's all kinds of factors that drive ignorance and prejudice. And, sometimes people are coached to hate from childhood. It's very disturbing to me to learn that the most far, far right-wing Jews in Israel, what we call the Haredim, the people who wear the black hats, white shirts, black suits all the time, long side curls. Many of them are wonderful, sweet people, but many of them are not. And I've read in Haaretz, the excellent Israeli daily that's very progressive, that a writer was quoted as saying, the children of the Haredim are being coached to hate secular Jews. So they're being coached and raised to hate other Jewish people who are not as observant as them. God knows what they think of people who aren't Jewish. There's a very deep exclusionary dynamic in the Jewish community, in all Jewish communities, that is often very, very self-defeating. And it's sad, it's disturbing. And once again, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu has made this much worse. His current government, it's as if T-Rump was reelected and had appointed a bunch of Proud Boys to the cabinet.
All right, wait, just, let me stop you.
Yeah. All right. There's a lot here.
We're not getting on Netanyahu yet.
Okay. All right. I'll let
Do you
drive.
think Jews have the right to say, I mean, you're Jewish. Do you think Jews have the right to demand their own land?
The answer is conditional. I would say yes, but Palestinians also have a right to their own land.
And why do you say yes?
Because Israel became a fact of, for better or worse, and I know there's a lot of worse for the Palestinians, Israel became a nation in 1948. It's not going away. The way that Israel was created is very troubling, but it was necessary. You can't undo facts on the ground of history. And the fact on the ground is that Israel is a nation state. It is recognized as a nation state. And to say you can't have a Jewish nation anymore, that would be troubling. I recognize the grievance. I validate the grievance, but because of Israel's horrible behavior under Netanyahu's government. But he no more represents the will of most of Israel any more than T-Rump represents the will of most of America.
Now, so the Jews, right? Did the majority of the Jews migrate to Palestine after World War II when they were running away from Hitler?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Let's circle back to the origins of Zionism and the origins of the modern conflict, which, as I know, is what you're getting at here. First of all, the modern conflict did not begin 3,000 years ago with Judaism, nor did it begin on October 7th. The modern conflict began in 1920, in the aftermath of World War I, at the San Remo Conference in Italy, when the great powers divvied up the Levant. That's where the artificial nation states of Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan were created, cutting across tribal boundaries, cutting across natural ethnic lines to create a series of states to please the British, the French, and the Russians, who still had a say in it then. The United States did not become Israel's protector until 1956, when President Eisenhower made the bold move of ordering ordering Israel, the UK, and France to pull out of their Suez campaign. Israel invaded the Suez area in 1956 as an imperialist operation. They were aided by Britain and France. An irony of history is at the same time, we were leading up to the 1956 election in November of that year for Eisenhower. At the same time, Khrushchev had just invaded Hungary. And Ike was furious when the tripartite invasion of the Suez occurred, and he ordered Israel, the UK, and France, pull back. How can I talk to Khrushchev about Hungary if you guys are doing this? So it was humiliating for all three of those countries. And at that point, to my reading of history, that's when the U.S. supplanted the UK and France as Israel's protector nation. Going farther back, Zionism began as an organic agrarian movement with a conference in Basel, Switzerland in 1896.
Wasn't it created by like a Jewish news reporter or something?
Theodor Herzl.
Yeah.
Yes. Theodor Herzl is considered the father of modern Zionism. He is the man who organized the first Zionist conference in Switzerland back in 1896. And they occurred every 4 years, sometimes 2-year intervals, every 2 to 4 years after that, where they better define the agenda. That was when, and actually prior to 1896, there were small movements of Jews from Europe to Palestine. And as it began organically, the Jews from Europe into Palestine organically blended in with the native Palestinians there. They were accepted. It was peaceful for the most part. The first real troubles began in the 1930s as the Jewish immigration from Europe before the State of Israel was founded. In the 1930s, the pace of immigration got much faster because of the Holocaust, because of other political things going on in Europe, which were killing Jews, literally. So as a result, more and more Jews were immigrating to Palestine, as it was called then, to make a new homeland.
Well,
as more and more came, the pace outpaced the absorption capacity of the native Palestinians and the infrastructure to absorb them. That's when it started to get ugly with riots and things like that.
Why Palestine? Because from my understanding, the UN offered Jews land in Africa.
Uganda.
Yeah, Uganda. They rejected it. The majority of them were pushed out of Germany during World War II. How come they didn't demand to go back and get land in Germany? Why Palestine?
Because that is considered the biblical homeland. Now, that being said, Zionism per se had no notions of Jewish nationalism, which is what the current Israeli government has made into a very ugly, brutal dynamic. So why Palestine? Because Jews and Muslims and Christians all claim Jerusalem as their spiritual home. Nazareth and Bethlehem for Christians, Jerusalem and Mecca in Saudi Arabia are considered the homes of Islam. All three of the great Semitic religions began there. And getting back to the sense of brotherhood, there's an Arabic expression called Ahl el-Kitab, people of the book. Christians, Jews, Muslims, all people of the book. And just as Islam accepts Jesus and Jewish prophets as their own, the Prophet Muhammad embraced Judaism, embraced teachings of Judaism into Islam. He embraced teachings of Jesus into Islam. And all three are and can be beautiful religions in their own way. What we're seeing now are the results of some very ugly politicization that's been driven by some very selfish agendas on the part of political leaders, such as Trump and Netanyahu.
Where does King David and Solomon fit in this story?
Now we're going back to biblical times. And that's not so much my field, but I'll give you the best answer I can. And deep into biblical history, King David and King Solomon and King Saul were the first three kings of the Jewish nation then. And the Palestinians were called Philistines. And what we know as the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem is the remaining wall of the Second Temple of Jerusalem that was built after the first temple was destroyed. I forget who was king when of those three. I appreciate your asking that question because that's prompting me to do a little more digging into that on a slower day. But once again, those three, Saul, David, and Solomon, were three original kings of ancient Israel, of the ancient Jewish nation. The modern Jewish nation began in 1948. But let's go back to 1920 at the aftermath of World War I, and even farther back. In 1917, Great Britain issued what is known as the Balfour Declaration. That was a statement by the British Crown favoring the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine, in the Levant. That was November of 1917. So that became part of the UK's part.
At this time, Britain was controlling the land, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And this was also during World War I when Great Britain was at war with Turkey and Germany. And this is also why the Ottoman Empire fell in the aftermath of World War I. All of the Levant was part of the Ottoman Empire. Great Britain had some protectorate areas in the Levant, which is how they came to have the interest. But prior to the Balfour Declaration, the UK also made promises to the Palestinians for a state through the British Foreign Secretary Sir Henry McMahon and his correspondence and series of letters with Sharif Hussein ibn Ali of Mecca. So there were a series of at least 8 diplomatic dispatches between 1915 and 1916 between McMahon and King Hussein of Mecca to make arrangements for a formal Palestinian state. It wasn't called Palestinian per se at the time, but that's what it was. And so where does all this fault lie? Primarily with Great Britain. Great Britain made 2 separate agreements on the same piece of real estate with 2 different parties. That's where it began. And then in the aftermath of World War I, there was a Jewish partition along with an Ottoman partition and others to satisfy the the political card
Well,
game there.
let's stop and stay on Great Britain real quick because I
Sure.
have some questions about that.
Yeah.
So you have this land that's controlled by Britain. Jewish people are demanding land. So you have this big conference, right, with all these other countries, and you can stop me if I'm saying something wrong. And then Great Britain decides, because when you look at the map of Palestine and you look at who controls what, right? It's a fucked up map. You're like, how is all of this middle land controlled? And then you have this one spot that's controlled by these people, and then this small little strip that's controlled by these people. It's a weird layout, right?
Now, question: are you talking about the partition for Palestinian land inside Israel in modern terms?
Yeah, I'm talking about when Great Britain basically divvied up the land.
Okay. Short answer this. I see no rhyme or reason to it. It was totally arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who knows what drove that agenda? Who knows why there was such a balkanization, as it were, of Jewish areas, Palestinian areas, Ottoman areas, Muslim areas, and so forth, Bedouin areas, and so forth. But, to your point, that is part of the problem. And looking at the map, looking at the maps as they evolve from 1917 onward, it does make no sense. The boundaries make no sense.
Yeah.
And that was the objection of many Arabs to the outcome of the San Remo conference because, the creation of Jordan made no sense. Same with Syria and Lebanon, cutting across tribal boundaries and natural ethnic boundaries to suit the will of the victors in World War I.
Because originally they declined this, and then that's how they went to war, and then the Jews, Israel won, right? And then that's how they controlled more land than what was even proposed, correct?
Well, that's what happened in 1947-48 with the formal founding of Israel by the UN. And that map particularly made no sense. It granted portions of the land for Jewish settlement, kind of spotted and blotted and dotted here and there. And, because it was rolled out, so to speak, in such a horrible way, that's what led to the tragedy of the Nakba and the Palestinian Holocaust, or Palestinian diaspora, let's call it. What's going on now in Gaza may or may not rightfully be called a Holocaust. It certainly has elements of it. And that's a heavy, heavy, heavy word. Genocide, yes. It's an awful genocide. And that's what's so troubling and so sad for many progressive, thoughtful Jewish people. We could not object more to having these horrible crimes against humanity carried out by what is supposed to be a Jewish government, which could not be acting more un-Jewish than what Bibi is doing.
So we have this land that was divvied out, right? So they get the land, and then you obviously, when you go to another country, there's already people in the land. So the Palestinians, explain to me how they were pushed in like these little small areas, and the living, like, because when you read about this, a lot of people say that they are prisoners in their own land, that they have no rights, and that's why you see the hatred toward Israel.
And I got to validate that. How and why they were evicted, it was brutal. Soldiers were sent. Unfriendly knock on the door. Get out. It's ours now. You go somewhere else. It wasn't much more nuanced than that. People got beat up. People got killed. Land was pirated. Farming land was pirated. It was an ugly, ugly, profane dynamic. And it is just totally antithetical to the ideals of Judaism that this would occur. That's why many people, another irony is this, many deeply observant Jews before Israel was founded, did not want to see a state of Israel. The original anti-Zionist are the far, far right-wing observant Jews who felt like the creation of a Jewish state in secular terms was an impediment to the arrival of the Messiah, and therefore they opposed it. Those deeply observant Jews, the Haredim, believe that the Israel as a nation state should not have occurred in 1948, that it should not have occurred until the Messiah came. Now, granted, they'd be waiting a long time. And that's funny, but it's not funny. But that's a big part of what's driven it. Another really sick irony is that the Haredim in Israel enjoy protected status, but they refuse to serve in the military. And they refuse to support the state, but they want to take money for their academies that teach children to hate Jewish people who are not as observant as they are. And there are pressures to end those subsidies to make the Haredim serve in the military. It's deeply unfair. So
when you have a group of people that are getting abused, have a history of getting abused, I feel like it creates
resentment
and another group, extremist groups, right? Just like Al Qaeda, they feel like for whatever reason we shouldn't be there. Blah blah blah. You're interfering with our way of living, right? And then Al Qaeda is born, extremist groups. So, do you believe the way, because Palestine, they don't have a military, correct?
Well, Palestine per se is not recognized as a nation state by all the nations in the world.
But Israel has a military.
Yeah, Israel has a military. Now,
so basically my question is, when these group of people are getting attacked left and right, an extremist group is created, which brings forth Hamas. When was Hamas, when did that start? Because people think Hamas just came out of nowhere on October 7th.
No, Hamas arose because the Palestinian Authority, which had governance, was not doing a good job. Both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority have and had gross elements of corruption from within, whereby all the millions and billions of dollars in aid they got from the U.S. and other countries, rather than spending it on education and agricultural projects, it was spent on military, which was necessary, but also, I'm getting a little lost here in my thoughts because we're kind of in the weeds on so many topics at once, and so let's sort this out.
We're talking about the origins of Hamas.
Okay. I'm a little embarrassed to say I can't pin the date on that for you, but in the 2000s, as dissatisfaction with the Palestinian Authority rose, that fueled the growth of Hamas, and the Palestinians had an election to choose Hamas. And again, I'm sorry I can't pin down the date for you, but it's within the last 10 to 20 years.
But basically, October 7th is not the first time you've heard of Hamas, correct?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Hamas, first of all, Hamas has run and ruled Gaza for the previous 3 years after the Palestinian Authority was voted out. But under Hamas's government, most of the people of Gaza were not happy with what they were doing. And Hamas has killed and tortured and imprisoned many Palestinians just because they have a different agenda. Again, it's a brutal organization.
What do you think their agenda is?
Hamas? Well, they made it very clear. Their agenda is the total destruction of Israel and the end of Israel as a nation state. They want to annihilate Israel, whereas Netanyahu, in turn, wants to annihilate Hamas and all the poor innocent people standing in his way. Now Biden's come up with a peace plan to try to end this, but Bibi has already expressed his intent to reject it and continue to prosecute the war, which is very troubling.
Do you consider Hamas a terrorist group?
Absolutely.
Like Al-Qaeda? Do you put them on that same level?
Absolutely. What happened on October 7th was a violation of Islamic principles as well. Killing non-combatants, killing innocent people, brutalizing and raping young women. That is all wholly objectionable and repugnant to Islam.
Mm-hmm.
But Hamas did all these things. Hamas has corrupted Islam just as Zionism has corrupted Judaism. That's an important parallel to remember. Neither represent the religions that they evolved out of, and in fact are totally antithetical to what the religions are and were.
So now that we have October 7th comes and war is basically started. Now I feel I'm going to compare this to like like how September 11th, right? September 11th happens.
That's a good comparison.
And then September 11th happens, and it's caused by it was done by a group, not a nation, right? And the United States, with our power and military, we go and we punish the whole nation instead of trying to find this one small group that caused this terrorist attack. Now, I believe that Hamas, just like Al-Qaeda, came and did something, same as September 11th. Now, Israel, with all their power and backing, they go and they punish a whole nation of people for the actions of this one small group.
It was a gross overreaction. Just as under Bush Jr., the American response to Al-Qaeda was badly misdirected and a gross overreaction, not the least of which was the suppression on civil liberties here in the United States, with Bush Jr.'s lapdog Ari Fleischer standing up in news conferences and threatening reporters with banishment if they asked the wrong question.
Mm.
September 11th was a horrible tragedy. And yes, the United States had a right to respond and retaliate. But rather than target it to the people actually responsible, it was more of a shotgun approach, scattershot approach, rather than something more pinpointed and directed at the sources of the violence.
Yeah.
Israel's doing the same thing.
Do you think when this is all said and done, that the UN should charge Netanyahu for war crimes?
Absolutely.
And why do you think that is?
Because he is committing war crimes.
What war crimes is he committing?
Over 36,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th, or shortly a few days after when the onslaught began. We're reading accounts every day about people in torturous pain in hospitals having to have surgery without anesthesia. The denial of food, the denial of medicine. It is an organized genocide being prosecuted by Netanyahu, and it is deeply profane and tragic for Jewish people to be witnessing this being done in our name. No, it's not in our name, because Netanyahu's brand of Zionism is not Judaism. He has morphed it into something profane, deeply un-Jewish.
Do you think Netanyahu is an extremist?
Absolutely.
Like, do you consider him as like a Saddam Hussein or Idi Amin?
I got to validate that comparison. Yes.
Mm. Now, I'm pretty sure that you're not the only one who feels that way. Why do you think he is able to get away with continuing this war? Because it's basically, you're a powerful country. You're basically like a bully. Like, you're fighting someone who can't fight back, doesn't have the means to fight back.
It's a total bullying dynamic, yes.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think he's able to get away with this?
Well, let's say he has gotten away with it thus far. Because, like with T-Rump, Netanyahu is governing out of fear. He is the most corrupt politician in the history of Israel. Like T-Rump, he is facing criminal charges for his own corruption, bribery, breach of public trust. And just like T-Rump, Netanyahu is running for prime minister again to stay out of jail, literally. I published maybe half a dozen articles in the Informed Comment website about this parallel dynamic of T-Rump and Bibi. And, eventually I'm going to be compiling it in a book form coupled with background material for my senior honors thesis about how the modern conflict really began between 1915 and 1917 to craft what I intend to be a cogent history with direct connections from timeline to timeline about how we got to this point. Now, how is he able to get away with it? Because he is governing from fear within Israel. At the same time, there have been demonstrations of as much as 100,000 people demanding his resignation. Before October 7th, that was a regular occurrence in the main squares of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. After the awfulness of October 7th, after October 7th, the nation was deeply embattled. 1,200 Israelis were killed that day. At least an equal number suffered life-altering wounds, lost their homes, had their homes blown up. And so the reaction was to close ranks and protect the country. All of a sudden, the huge 100,000-person demos against Netanyahu stopped. Now they've generated back up again. And now many Israeli soldiers are refusing to serve in Gaza, at least a few. It's hard to know the number. But there are many conscientious objectors in Israel. There are IDF military veterans who have expressed great objection to Netanyahu and demanded his resignation, as well as rabbis all over the world who are demanding Netanyahu's resignation. The point is that Jews are not a monolith. There are all kinds of Jews in this world, ranging from the most far right-wing people in Israel and the U.S. to radical Jews from Memphis and Ann Arbor, such as myself.
What do you say to the people who say this is war, when in every war has casualties of innocent people being killed?
What do I say? I say, why? I ask, why is there a war? And there's throughout the history of man, I don't think anyone's ever come up with a good answer as to why is there war. It's always stupid. It's always selfish. It's always prosecuted by someone with a selfish agenda. And right now we are so deep in the weeds, so to speak, of so much conflict and so many complex drivers of the conflict, it's hard to sort it out. That's what leads to what you and I both recognize is so much misinformation on both sides. We see beautiful young people at demos and college campuses in Oakland and San Francisco, old people too, demonstrating fervently against the occupation war in Gaza. They know that Israel is prosecuting an ugly war in Gaza, but many of them don't know what led up to it, or the nuances, or what's going on to try to make peace. And frankly, what alarms me as much as anything is the gross misunderstanding of so many young people who fail to make the distinction between Judaism, our religion, and Zionism as a political ideology that has been deeply corrupted by some bad leaders. Zionism is not Judaism.
I lost my train of thought. Okay. So every war, right? Every war starts however it starts. but every war ends by just two people talking and ending it, right? Do you think the United States holds the key to ending this war?
Absolutely, because Israel is the United States client state.
Mm.
These demos are occurring all over the country and all over the world, and Biden is depicted as the bad guy because while he has paid some thoughtful lip service to the need for a ceasefire, he has refused to do what Obama wanted to do and did, of cutting back on the military aid when it's being misspent, of cutting back on the military aid and the financial assistance when it's being misdirected, when it's being used for purposes not intended, when it's being used in violation of the terms of agreement, which is what's happening now. President Biden has every right to stop sending money to Israel. He's afraid to do it because he's afraid of losing the Jewish vote. But by his tentativeness is fueling a horribly misguided effort to not re-elect him. And now I need to talk about, even though Biden is a great disappointment to us, even though many of us are furious with Joe Biden for his refusal to stop the spigot of financial aid to Israel, which is committing genocide, there are many, many reasons why we all have to hold our nose and support Biden against T-Rump in November of 2016. And my cautionary tale has to do with what I did in 1980 when Jimmy Carter was running for re-election against Ronald Reagan. Jimmy Carter, we now know from history, was not only a good president, but a great president. One of our best presidents. He was also one of Israel's best friends by initiating the Camp David Accords, which was the initial brokering of peace when it all seemed hopeless. He had the cojones and the spine to go where no other U.S. president had in brokering the agreement between President Anwar Sadat of Egypt and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin at the time, leading to the Camp David agreements. Many right-wing Jews refuse to recognize that Carter and Obama have been Israel's best friends throughout history. Whereas during T-Rump's 4 years of presidency, he chose a far, far right-wing Jewish ambassador who was totally sympathetic to the Likud government, who gave Israel everything it wanted, including moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in violation of international law, and other things like that. So, again, I got so many threads I'm bouncing around here too.
Yeah, well, let me ask a question.
Sure.
So, like we stated before, the U.S. holds the key to ending this war. What do you say to the people that are like, Russia and Ukraine, that's their business. Israel and Palestine, that's their business. The U.S. shouldn't be getting in all of these countries' business, and we should just worry about the United States.
All right. There are many reasons why that's objectionable. The concept you're talking about here is isolationism, which has been very destructive in the history of this country and was mostly prosecuted by a bunch of bigots going back to the 1920s and in the State Department and what later became the OSS and the CIA. It's just, ask the question again.
The question was, what do you say to people that say the U.S. shouldn't be getting in the other country's business? Okay. Like, you know how every time there's a conflict around the world, the U.S. or everyone looks towards the U.S. to like help them or to interfere or whatever.
Good point. Going back to Vietnam, the primary objection is, why should we be the world's policeman?
Yes.
Why do we have to be the world's policeman?
Yes.
Do we want to be? Yes, no, maybe. No, we don't. Whether we like it or not, the U.S. has accrued a history and accrued a great deal of power as an influencer and leader among nations. We are the wealthiest nation. We have the strongest military, arguably. We have greater resources. And we have the largest foreign policy budget of any nation in the world. Israel and Egypt are far from the only nations the U.S. gives financial and military aid to. And, the nature of the question itself is troubling. Why are we doing this? Why should we be doing this? Why do we have to do this? There are many reasons to object, but why is it happening? Because, well, it's an inherited standing for one thing. President Biden inherited it from his predecessors. And so I guess the short answer would be, for now, we're stuck with it, and we have to manage our way out of it in order to create a peaceful situation where we can hand it off to the people who want to run their own countries, or hand it off to another power who wants to manage things. We don't want to hand it off to Russia or China or Korea, North Korea rather. So that's what's troubling. But I do want to circle back as to why it's important to continue to support Biden. No one should make their presidential vote on the basis of one issue. You don't have to fall in love with the presidential candidate you're voting for. And you're not voting for Donald T. Trump or Joe Biden. You are voting for the people they will appoint to their cabinet positions. You are voting for the people they will appoint to their governments. You are paying for the people who manage those doddering old men, and they both are. T. Trump has already proven that he has and will appoint destructive people. He will bring Proud Boys into the government this time around if he's elected, just as Netanyahu has brought Israeli Proud Boys into his government. And the behavior of Israel under those guys is downright fascist. And so in 1980, I was furious with Carter for the Olympic boycott. And so I was pretty sure he was going to win. I didn't think Reagan had a prayer. So I voted for not John Anderson, but Barry Commoner, a famous environmentalist from Washington University in St. Louis, who was running for president. And I had a Commoner button at home. And I voted for Barry Commoner because I was furious with Carter for the Olympic boycott and other things I wasn't particularly happy about. But, oops, I accidentally helped elect Ronald Reagan by voting for Barry Commoner. And I would hate...
Explain. What do you mean?
Pardon me?
I mean, explain that. What do you mean?
Because me and at least millions of other people chose not to vote for Carter, or voted for Barry Commoner or John Anderson or another third-party candidate. Those are votes that Carter did not get that would have helped him defeat Ronald Reagan.
Oh, okay. Now I see what you're saying.
And let's recognize this too. In my worldview, the world was humming along pretty nicely until about 1981, when Reagan became president of the U.S., Menachem Begin became prime minister of Israel, or was reelected by then, and Margaret Thatcher became prime minister of Great Britain. All three of those leaders took their countries on a sharp tack to the far, far right, from which the world has not recovered. That's why we were in this position. All the awful things that T. Trump is doing, they come from Reagan's template, Reagan's playbook. But he wasn't mean enough for them, nor was Bush Sr. or Bush Jr. So now they have T. Trump, who's the meanest politician in U.S. history, most destructive politician in U.S. history, most destructive man in American history, in my opinion. And he's poised to try to become president again. He was convicted last week of 34 felony counts.
I think J. Edgar Hoover is worse than Trump.
He gives him a run for his money, and that's a good comparison.
I think he's definitely. I will fuck with Trump before I fuck with J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, but you're asking good questions. I appreciate that we're, we got half a dozen threads in the air at once, and you're doing a good job of managing them because I tend to free associate and get off track. And I'm letting you drive, so I'll kick it back to you, my friend.
So this war that's going on, I feel like we're at the point of no return. So much damage has been done, right? To the land, to the people, to the way Jews are perceived. Netanyahu. So whenever this war is over, how do you think? Do you even see like a peace? Because I think you're just creating. Israel is just creating another more extremist groups. These kids who are seeing.
Yes, they are.
These kids that are seeing their parents get blown up, their sisters burnt and raped. Do you have to think that these kids are going to grow up being like, yo, I fucking hate Jews in Israel. And then they're going to come together. This hatred for these people that are causing all this, you're going to have another person who comes and grabs these kids and be like, yo, the people who murdered your family, well, come with us and get your anger out. We're going to blow up some shit.
Precisely. Netanyahu is creating a new generation of people who hate Jews, who hate Israel, who don't understand that Israel is not Judaism, at least in what it's become in these days. And your point is right on the mark, because we are breeding a new generation of terrorists with these horrible, horrible things going on.
Yeah, Hamas is going to be the last thing you should worry about. You're going to have to worry about different groups. You're basically growing Hamas. I guarantee that after this is over, Hamas is, as far as membership, is going to grow.
Yes, and that's just one of the very basic things that Netanyahu and the right-wingers don't recognize, that by doing all these horrible things, they are breeding and nurturing a new generation of terrorists who are going to come back and become murderous, maybe have another October 7th, God forbid. And, your question is timely because last week, President Biden proposed a peace plan that has 3 different parts. And Netanyahu has already said, I'm not going to go along. I'm going to continue to prosecute this war. I'm going to continue to do everything I can to raise Gaza and destroy Hamas. Whereas President Biden's position is, number one, you're never going to completely destroy Hamas. Number two, which really might be number one, Hamas has been so badly damaged by the campaign, they no longer have the capacity to mount an effective attack against Israel. Now, that may or may not be true. It's certainly arguable. We can't know that sitting here in California. But that's another big part of the dynamic here.
If you were, let's do this is a hypothetical question. If you were in charge way back in the day, right?
Which day? 1920, 1948?
Well, I'm talking about like the Great Britain time when they had that meeting, right?
Okay.
If you were in charge, how would you have handled the situation of dividing land, or would you even have gave Jews their own country? How would you have handled the situation?
Good question. Great question. Yes. I would have aided creating a Jewish homeland in Palestine. At the same time, I would have done it in a way that secured the rights of the Palestinian people to their own native land. They've always been there. Jews were there thousands of years ago. We weren't there there was always some Jewish presence in Palestine even before Israel. Not great, but there were always Jews there. And, the creation of Israel, in many minds, is an artificial state, as artificial as Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. But like it or not, these artificial states are facts on the ground now. They're not going away. You're not going to redraw the lines of all these nations along the original tribal lines of 100 years ago. The applications, that would be a misapplication at this point. What would I have done in 1920? I would have granted Israel a homeland. I would have compelled the UK to honor both sets of agreements they made with the Balfour Declaration, which was not so much an agreement as it was a declaration, whereas the Hussein McMahon correspondence was indeed a series of agreements through diplomatic correspondence that, while they weren't official treaties, they were working documents, a working plan for making it work going forward. And so, if we're going to get in the Wayback Machine back to 1920, right after World War I, that's what I would do.
I mean, would you just split the land in half? How would you divide the land?
That's okay. That question is a can of worms we can't know. How would I have divided the land? I honor that as a good question, but I cannot give you a short answer.
Because a lot of people, you have to put yourself in the shoes of people who make these crazy, hard decisions, right? So a lot of people say, "Oh, what happened was bad," but they have no solution to. They have an opinion, but they don't have a solution of what to do, right? So that's the reason why I asked.
Okay. So now we look at what we have left today. What's the solution? Biden has proposed one. I haven't read it as deeply as I intend to, but it's a pretty thoughtful one. And I see it as a workable working plan. What's troubling is that all the Republicans have declared that in response to T-Rump's criminal conviction, they want to punish Joe Biden by not letting him pass any affirmative, positive, effective legislation. Is that Joe Biden can control the New York state courts, which convicted Donald Trump. Trump wasn't convicted in the federal court, the New York state court. He can't pardon himself, God forbid he's elected again. And so... I
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Is that why they didn't charge him federally?
Well, he's facing federal charges over the January 6th thing in D.C.
So if he was
charged, but he's in Georgia and Florida, and New York. Those are state charges. That
you can't pardon yourself.
He cannot pardon himself if he's reelected.
I think that was a political move. To me, honestly, because he definitely would have pardoned himself.
Well, absolutely. And what's really disgusting is that 8 senators, led by the usual suspects of Mike Lee and so forth, and that awful woman, Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, who's one of the stupidest people I've ever known in my life. I mean, really. They are saying, we're not going to pass anything positive for Joe Biden because Donald Trump was convicted. Well, Donald Trump made his own bed.
Yeah.
And he's lying in his gold-threaded sheets or whatever right now. And doing his best to try to spin this conviction to his political advantage. And it's helping him raise a lot of money, but it's also driving people away. And here again, I have to caution and urge every one of your viewers and listeners, don't be a one-issue candidate. Look at the big picture. Because if Biden is not reelected, T-Rump will be reelected, and that will be the end of democracy in the U.S. He is promising that.
What do you think the biggest misconception with Jews and the biggest misconception with Palestinians is?
Thank you. The biggest misconception about Jews is that all Jews support Israel, that Jews are a monolith and we're all alike. That is a horrible, destructive misconception. Once again, there are all kinds of Jews in this world. And many of us are fiercely progressive, even radical. And it's mystifying to me the mere existence of Jewish Republicans. It just does not compute, particularly as the Republican Party has evolved under T-Rump, which is brazenly anti-Semitic. Yet these people still support him because one of the gross misconceptions of the Republican Party that have put out, they've got their people believing that the Republican Party has many Jews believing that the Republican Party is more favorable to Jews in Israel than the Democrats are. That is totally untrue. Israel now depends more on evangelical Christians for tourism dollars than American Jews, because so many American Jews have been alienated from Israel. They're not going anymore. And the right-wing Israeli government has created this sick alliance with the evangelical community because the evangelicals love Israel. All right, time out. What's behind this evangelical love for Israel? Something not so good for the Jews, as it turns out. The evangelical agenda is driven by this: their desire to round up the Jews all in one place so they can get on with their apocalypse. That's definitely not good for the Jews. That's sick. That's dark. But still, Republican Jews are supporting Donald Trump and the evangelical agenda, pretending that this doesn't involve a more euphemized version of the final solution that Hitler proposed, to have a world without Jews. That's what the evangelicals want. But the right-wing Jews refuse to recognize that because of the convenience of their political support for the right-wing government in Israel right now. Thank you for prompting that.
Now, Palestinians, what's the biggest misconception?
Well, I would say that the misconceptions about Palestinians are more pervasive among right-wing Jews than anybody else in the rest of the world. And that is that the far right-wing Likud point of view is that all Palestinians hate Israel. Well, they're breeding people to hate Israel with what they're doing. Is that all Arabs hate Jews? Most, not all. There are millions of thoughtful Arabs who look at these issues with the same context that you and I do, trying to discern what's right and what's wrong. Most of the world, since October 7th, has become deeply sympathetic to the Palestinians for all the right reasons, because they are being victimized, they are being bullied, they are being tortured. At the same time, there continue to be attacks against Israel from Gaza and from Lebanon, because the Hezbollah operations in Lebanon, financed primarily by Iran, are still going strong. I have friends and associates in northern Israel who are still dealing with bomb shelters and air raids and things like that. Contacts I have on Facebook, people I knew a long time ago who were living there. I have friends in Israel who are diametrically opposed to everything I say and believe about it, and vice versa. I have friends in Israel who are still wedded to the notion of this biblical prophecy, which again was not part of the original idea of Zionism. That's something that's arisen really under Netanyahu's government, and actually since Begin, since the early 80s when Begin was prime minister. Israel has had some more thoughtful prime ministers during that time, namely Ehud Barak, who was also a great war general, and who, frankly, has a mixed political and military legacy. But as prime minister, he was much more progressive than the right-wingers from the Likud government. And Israeli politics itself is such a morass of a mess because there's so many factions. And because there's so many kinds of Jews in this world, it's hard to find a consensus on anything. Now, I wrote a piece of satire about the Jewish conspiracy. When Trump was running for president in 2016, I wrote a piece of satire in the Jewish newspaper The Forward, which began as a socialist newspaper called the Daily Forward. It's now called The Forward. But I wrote a piece of satire that said, I tried to organize a Jewish conspiracy, but we couldn't agree on anything. Now, give me a rim shot on that.
Do you get pushback from your comrades when you defend, well, not defend, but when you have sympathy in the Palestinians, or when you talk negatively about Israel and Netanyahu?
Okay, you read my mind on that question. Yes. Unqualified, yes. I have people in my own family who hate me over it. There are people in my own hometown Jewish community who are very progressive in every way, except when it comes to Israel. I got banished from my local JCC because of my publications. I have been not included in family events because of who I am as a radical Jew from Memphis, arguing for Palestinian human rights. And now I accept that as a badge of honor. What's interesting is that there was a New York Times article last week about how many Jewish college students are being ostracized and alienated from their fraternity brothers, sorority sisters, sports teammates, dorm mates, whatever, because of their support for Israel. Well, all I can say is I'm awful gosh darn sorry about that, but look at the other side of it. Since 1980, I have been tarred and feathered in newspaper columns and letters to the editor, calling me all kinds of horrible names because I'm a Jewish person who supports Israel. I've been called a self-hating Jew so many times, I've turned it back around on them. The self-hating Jews aren't the ones who defend Palestinian human rights. The self-hating Jews are the ones who still suck up to Trump, even though everything about him is grossly anti-Semitic. So I took that ugly phrase and turned it right back around on them in that same piece of satire.
Why did you choose this subject to study?
Thank you.
And why are you so passionate about this subject? Did anything happen that made you want to focus on this specifically?
Yes. And we're circling back to the beginning of the conversation most appropriately, so thank you. As a Jewish kid growing up in Memphis, bar mitzvah right after King's assassination and everything, raised by progressive parents. Mom was a charter member of the NAACP. Dad was the first white board member of the Urban League in town. Very progressive, liberal upbringing. With that background and context, when I first began to read about the true facts of Arab-Israeli history, I was shocked to learn that everything I'd been taught in Temple Sunday School was a myth. And I was motivated by this silly messianic complex that a Jewish person who really understood the history and passions and motivations of both sides could make a difference in bringing peace to the region. So my messianic complex drove me to devote my academic career to this field, thinking that I could get a job in the State Department or a political appointee to actually broker some sort of peace between Israel and Palestine. Now my goals are much more modest, which is to try to get involved with what's going on the college campuses and broker peace between the factions of Israel haters, Israel lovers, Palestinian supporters, people who don't understand it, and so forth. I mean, hell, we look at all the conflicts on college campus, the gross riots at UCLA that were allowed by the administration. They actually, at UCLA, security did not intervene as right-wingers, some wearing IDF uniforms, attacked the Palestinian protest encampment. That was gross. That was disgusting. I'm sure there's going to be many legal claims coming out of that and lawsuits. Now, brokering peace on college campuses is every bit of a challenge as brokering peace between the parties to begin with. That's where we are. What can I do? I don't know. I attended a Jewish conference at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley last month. And I've been reaching out to the organizers of that conference to try to be included in the effort to help manage that. I happen to have had past contact with Dan Moguloff, the known as the big bad communications guy at UC for all the bad things. 20 years ago, I was supportive of UC on their agenda to enlarge the football stadium, to improve the athletic program. You're talking to a former Cal Bear corporate athletic supporter. I'm not giving them another dime. Moguloff made promises to me he did not make good on. And since then, I've reached out to him to propose this or that, and the door's not open anymore. When I was helping them with a project on their agenda, he was my friend. Now he doesn't return calls. So obviously he's Jewish, and he is sympathetic towards Israel, and he doesn't understand everything that you and I do. He will not enjoy the conversation that you and I are having right now. I think I'm going to send it to him.
I have one more question. You said your bar mitzvah was right after King died or before?
Right after. Let me give you the timeline. And thank you for asking.
Wait, I still have a question about that.
Go ahead and put your question.
So after that happened, how did your family react?
Thank you. I still want to set the context.
Because you're a white family in Memphis.
Yes.
I mean, people would think, oh, that's racist.
Yeah. I'm from a white, progressive Jewish family in Memphis with a great history of supporting liberal and progressive politics. My mom joined the NAACP in 1948 when it was founded, when she was a freshman at Sarah Lawrence University in New York. My dad, in 1968, shortly after King's assassination, was invited by Herman Ewing, the director of the Memphis Urban League, to be the first white board member of the Memphis Urban League. So my context is that my parents, mom's still living, thank God, are very progressive. Dad was. And we were horrified by King's assassination. We grieved over King's assassination. I'll never forget how I learned.
How old were you when this happened?
Okay. I was just, my birthday and my bar mitzvah were May 18th, May 19th of 1968. King was killed on August 4th of 1968. The Memphis sanitation workers' strike began on February 10th of 1968.
How old were you?
I was 12, about to turn 13.
Okay.
And I was shooting baskets in the driveway with my brother, came in for dinner. The TV news was on, and they were about to sign off. And then the reporter said, Reporter said, I've just been handed a bulletin that Martin Luther King was shot in Memphis. We'll have details as the evening goes on. And then the TV switched to the national network for about 60 seconds of whatever silly show was on after the local news. Then all of a sudden, bam! Network news. The focus of the nation and the world is suddenly on Memphis for all the wrong reasons because Martin Luther King had been killed there. My friends at Stax Music used to party at the Lorraine Motel where King was killed there. That was about the only place in Memphis where blacks and white folks could socialize comfortably. And so all of the great Stax musicians used to go there after hours, after sessions or whatever, to party, hang out and everything. That was their second home. So King's assassination was especially grievous for the music industry there. And
as a 12-year-old, did you know how the impact of Martin Luther King and how big a deal this assassination was?
Absolutely. And I'm also proud of the fact that my rabbi, James A. Wax, who administered my bar mitzvah, was the man who literally completed King's work. The day after the assassination, Rabbi Wax led a march of all the clergymen in Memphis from St. Mary's Episcopal Cathedral down Poplar Avenue to City Hall, where he confronted Mayor Loeb on national TV and made a beautiful, eloquent statement about human rights, the importance of the laws of God over the laws of man, and lectured to the mayor on national TV. This was a guy I knew well. You know, this was a guy I would occasionally, there was one day I was having a conversation with the rabbi across from his desk, and I went home and saw him on the TV news. This is while he was brokering the strike. The strike broke out on February 10th or 11th. Rabbi Wax became involved as the primary negotiating lead 2 days later because the mayor would not recognize the union, AFSCME. The city did not recognize the union, nor the city council. And so it fell to Rabbi Wax as president of the Memphis Ministers Association to broker the settlement between the city, the union, and the sanitation workers. And the mayor was not budging. The city was not budging. Rabbi Wax went to a wealthy benefactor in the Jewish community and got $500,000 to pay the benefits that were demanded. That's how it was resolved.
Now I see that you get emotional talking about King. Was this someone that you, like, when people ask me what people in history do you admire and respect, and I always say Malcolm X is a man that the way he lived his life, carried himself, and what he stood for, and what he did for his people are the reasons why Malcolm X is a person that I look up to, right? Was King one of those people for you, or?
Absolutely. I was well aware of Martin Luther King's importance as an American leader, as a black leader, as a broker of peace. You know, I was a precocious kid. You know, I read the newspapers starting when I was about 8 years old. And we also had, because my mom, I was born to a teenage mom before her 20th birthday. And she had all 4 children before her 25th birthday. And fortunately, my parents were in a position to retain a lot of wonderful nurturing help from black nannies in our household. And the black nannies who helped my mom raise us had as much to do with my education and outlook and perspective as anybody, including Sunday school teachers and rabbis and my parents. That's why I get emotional about King. In remembrance of my loving black nannies who shared their experience of being black in America in the 40s and 50s and 60s with me.
Mm-hmm.
I got some heavy teachings from them. And I'll never forget the day of the March on Washington in 1963, all the excitement that generated around my house, and having them explain what was going on to me and all that. So thank you for recognizing the emotional importance.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for asking the thoughtful questions. Thank you for prompting everything that we discussed here. I hope it's informative for your viewers, your listeners. Of course, I'll be sharing this too to help you spread the word. And I'm happy to take whatever time to wrap this up or tie up any loose ends.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. It was very informative to me, and hopefully everyone who's listening will get some education from this.
Oh, one more thing I got to interject here. Sorry, but as you see, I'm wearing the traditional yarmulke, kippah, that Jewish people wear in the synagogues and the observant Jews wear out on the street and all around town. I'm also wearing a beautiful keffiyeh that I bought in East Jerusalem in 1980, which has become the symbol of Palestinian nationalism, Palestinian resistance. And I'm not the first or only Jew by any means to wear a kippah, yarmulke, and a keffiyeh at the same time.
The first I've seen.
Yeah, maybe I'll wear it around town today, see what kind of reactions I get. But I have read about people wearing yarmulkes and a keffiyeh at their Passover seders recently, at college graduations, and seen pictures of same. So I guess pairing them together is a symbol of a righteous, radical Jew who wants peace, understands both sides, advocates for peace, advocates for human rights, advocates for civil rights, and as a reminder that we are all Ahl el-Kitab, people of the book. I'll rest on that, kick it back to you, Counselor.
Yeah, so once again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story, your life, and educating me and the viewers and listeners about this conflict. And yeah, hopefully there will be peace, but I'm a realist, and I don't think there will ever be peace. Just like Afghanistan and Iraq, I don't think there will ever be peace in certain areas of the world.
I got to validate that. And I just want to, once again, remind your viewers and listeners to please check out my commentaries on Israel and Palestine on the website Informed Comment, informedcomment.com. My work is easy to find. I am H. Scott Prosterman. Last name is spelled P as in pepper, Rosterman. Put it into any search engine, and you'll find a lot of teachings and tutorials about what we've been talking about here today. And I'm easy to find on Facebook too. So thanks, y'all.
What's a go-to, like if you had to give someone one article to read that you wrote?
I would refer you to, thank you, my discussion of Senator Chuck Schumer's speech to Congress 2 months ago, in which he became the highest-ranking elected Jewish American official to advocate for a ceasefire, to advocate for a two-state solution, to advocate for a Palestinian state alongside Israel. That would be a good starting point.
And where can they find that at?
That's on informedcomment.com.
Informedcomment.com. Okay.
Published by Professor Juan Cole at the University of Michigan, the center of the universe.
Are you working on anything currently? Do you have anything coming out where people can look forward to?
Yes. I've got an assignment to discuss Biden's peace plan in conjunction with whether it has a chance in hell, considering 8 Senate Republicans and many members of the House have vowed to not cooperate with anything positive in retaliation for T-Rump's conviction. This is a tough assignment because we've got to get into the weeds on the dynamics of U.S. politics, and the dynamics of Biden's peace plan proposal, which has already been summarily rejected by Netanyahu. That is very disturbing. And, we're at a time where every day is a news day, every day is dramatic, every day is fluid, things are in flux, and most of us thoughtful people are working to find thoughtful solutions to these problems and bring peace to Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, streets of Oakland, streets of Memphis, everywhere.
Do you have any last words?
I think we've all summarized it pretty well. I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and discuss these with you. You've asked some great questions that have led us to cover most of the basis. So I'll rest on what we've done thus far. And thank you very much, my friend.
This is Everyday Celebrity Podcast, and we are out. You.